Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a Kickstarter preview. This one is MonstroCity or MonstroCity, depending on how you want to say it, from Vesuvius Media. This is a 1 to 4 player real-time game where you're playing monsters trying to destroy a city. It's unlike any game like this that I think you've probably ever played. You're going to be fighting against Dr. Spotnik, but mostly you're going to be fighting against all these buildings out here on the board.
Yeah, and these buildings have a variety of different effects. Specifically, the one I want to talk about is the red-topped building here, which are your turrets. So those are the most damaging buildings you're going to have to watch out for. You're also going to have these purple buildings, which are special buildings, and then the common buildings, which are gray.
Yeah, what you can see right here is the main board, and we should say this is a prototype, so keep that in mind. This board is just a piece of paper, but as you can see, these miniatures, while 3D printed, are already looking pretty sharp. These are really, really cool, sort of monsters, but in sort of that cartoony way. We have the board here with all of the buildings put on it already. You're going to do that at the beginning of the game. You're going to put these buildings out in a very systematic manner, starting with those red turrets Kira just mentioned, then onto the common buildings, and then onto the special buildings. You're going to do so in a way that spreads them out around the board so that they have equal opportunity to kill you when you're playing the game.
The board is set out in a 10 by 10 grid, which is going to allow for the movement for each of your characters. Now, you can't move through the buildings, but you can move around the buildings.
And every player is going to have a player board in front of them that represents their monster. There's a little bit of information here, including the monster's health, and then down here is their rage. Their Rampage ability is going to be built by this rage meter. Once it's filled to 5, you're able to fire that off just like you would any die face. We haven't gotten to any of that yet, but you're going to be rolling a lot of dice in this game. But this allows you to do a little extra something when you're playing the game.
Additionally, on your player board, you'll have your monster's base movement, which is about the same for all the monsters, though there are some variability there, as well as their special ability. In the advanced version and in the final copy, there'll be another side to this player board.
Each player is also going to have a bunch of damage cubes in their player color. You're going to use these damage cubes on all the different things that you damage in the game, including the buildings. When you do damage, you're just going to place the damage right there on top of the building to fill it up to the various levels of health that those buildings have. The reds have 9, the special buildings have 7, and the common buildings have 6 hit points. Once those are destroyed, they're going to be taken off the board.
Lastly, you have your dice. These have a variety of dice faces, which all will have their own unique ability.
Back to the main board, you're going to have the city threat level, which is a big board here that represents a couple of different things. One is the city threat level. That's going to be represented by the 4 different rows of numbers. As you move along those numbers, you're going to trigger various things throughout the game at the end of each round. You're also going to have the police station. The police station is going to have a number of police cars on it, and you're going to be taking those police cars at a certain phase of the game and adding them to the board. The police cars represent yet more threat in the city that's going to affect your monsters as you're rolling your die during the meat of the game.
Lastly, you'll see 3 decks of cards, which we'll talk about in more detail as we go through the phases of each round.
Now, so let's talk about the phases of each round. This game is going to be played in 5 rounds, and each of those rounds is 5 phases. We're going to go through those phases fairly quickly and talk a lot about one of them in particular. The first phase is a spawn phase. This is very simple. In fact, it's likely to not happen too much throughout the game, but at the beginning of the game, this is when you're going to be spawning your monsters out onto the board. Throughout the game, this is going to happen if your monster happens to be off of the board at this point. You're going to simply look around the board for these spaces where you can spawn your monsters, choose any one you want, and place your monster there before you begin the next phase, which is the police phase.
And in this phase, you're going to spawn police cars out of the police station onto the board into the lowest number of spaces available, starting from the right to the left.
Yeah, you're always going to be taking police cars equal to the number of players at this point. The more police cars that are out there, the worse it is for the monsters. So during the round, you're going to want to try to get those police cars back off the board. Whenever that happens, they're simply going to go back in reverse order back into the police station.
Next is the retaliation phase. You'll be looking at the city threat level to determine how many of the retaliation cards you'll flip over and resolve them one at a time. Those cards will be things like Sniper Attack, which is going to hit the monster with the highest HP for 5 damage.
There can also be some decent or good retaliation cards too. Here's one that gives you a little bit of health back. So you never know what you're going to get from the retaliation cards, but typically they're very, very bad things. The next thing we do is the Rampage phase of the game. That's when you're going to be taking your monsters and running out all over the board, trying to destroy as many things, but particularly buildings. And to do this, you're going to be rolling these dice. So at the beginning of this phase, you're going to set a timer or use the app that comes with the game. And once it goes, everyone's going to be just rolling their dice and executing these die face as quickly as possible. Now, some of these die face are good, some of them are not so good. We'll talk about a few of them right now, just so you have a better idea of what you're going to be doing during this phase. And the first one that I want to talk about is the bad one. We'll get the bad stuff right out of the way. This is the city side of the dice. It's a little turret symbol. When you roll this, all of the turrets, which are the red-topped buildings, are going to attack monsters within their range. Now, range is very simple here. When it comes to turrets, it's going to be any adjacent monster to the city block. So for example, if you take a look at this monster, he's adjacent to this, and this city block. All 4 of those turrets would do damage equal to the city threat level at that particular time.
The next bad die face is the police die face. We're going to go back to the police station. We're going to see how many police cars are no longer in the station, and that'll indicate the amount of damage you're going to take for each of these that you roll.
Yeah, now that we've gotten the bad out of the way, at least the bad for the monsters, we're going to talk about combat. This side of the die allows you to do some damage to things. Now, unlike the turrets, your range is squares adjacent directly to you. So you have to be right up next to a building or right up next to a police car in order to do damage. When you use this face, you're simply going to add damage to that. If you're adding damage to a building, you simply place the damage right on top of the building. Police cars are 1 damage. There are going to be some other obstacles that have more damage. You're simply going to place your damage cubes in the space next to that until they've reached their limit and are taken off the board.
The next one we'll talk about is the rage side of the die, which allows you to move your rage meter up on your Rampage track here, and then when you get to 5, you'll be able to actually execute that ability. If you roll more than you have on your track, execute the ability and wrap around.
Yeah, the rage is really interesting because it effectively, once you have it filled, is another die face. You can use it at any time. It just moves all the way back down, and then you can get it right back up there and do more damage. The interesting thing is those rage abilities are unique in that you can really set some big attacks up. My attack is to shoot 2 ahead of me and do damage to everything around it. I think Kira's is to jump 3 spaces and then do area damage to everything around where they land.
Super powerful.
The last die face, and probably the most important, is the energy. It's most important because it lets you do a number of different things. 1, you can increase your rage, just like the rage side. 2, you can attack, just like the attack side. But 3, you use it to move. Now, at the beginning of every roll, you're going to be able to do 1 free movement. And movement is limited to your movement on your player board. Again, this is usually 1, but I think one of the monsters lets you move twice. When you use energy as movement, this is extra movement. You're going to be moving orthogonally around the board. You have to move around everything on the board because you have to destroy it. If there's a monster in your way, you don't want to destroy that, but you do have to move around it. So you're going to find yourself using energy more often than not to get around the board as much as possible.
And after that, it's the cleanup phase. We're going to adjust the city threat level by counting up the amount of buildings that we destroyed during our round. Each of the buildings have a different value that we're going to add up. Red buildings will be 2, purple buildings will be 2, and common buildings will be 1.
Yeah, when you adjust the city threat level, you're going to be moving this token up each row and then up each corresponding row. There's a couple things to note as you do this. When you hit a red spot with Dr. Spotnik, you're going to have to flip another retaliation card and resolve that. Again, those are typically very bad things. Sometimes they can be good, but it's really up in the air. The other one is the green space, and this is the scientist, which is a reinforcement space. These are almost always really good cards, and they do a number of different things.
One of the things might be, for instance, dropping med kits down onto the board. Another might be allowing you to refill your rage meter.
And once you've resolved all the special spots on that board, you're going to move on to the second part of this phase, which is to spawn an event. In rounds 2, 3, and 4, you're going to flip one of the event cards and resolve it. Now, the event cards are almost always going to put something out onto the board, and it's almost always something bad. We have here alongside the board these roadblocks, these tanks, helicopters. There's some shield generators and energy. All of these things, except for the energy, are usually going to do things to make the next round that much more difficult. Those effects are going to stay in play until all of those pieces are removed from the board. For example, if you put tanks out on the board, it's going to make the police attack that much more difficult until you've destroyed all the tanks. And these tanks take 4 damage before they can be removed from the board. So these events can really change up the game quite a bit.
And that's it. That's the game. You're going to do that until you've destroyed all of the buildings or until you've reached the end of round 5.
Yeah, and if you reach the end of round 5 and you haven't removed all the buildings, I've got bad news, you've lost the game. So that's the lose condition. The win condition is just simply removing all of the buildings from the board, and you can do that in any round. Now, it's going to be difficult to do that before, say, round 4, and if you do it in round 4, you're actually going to get a little extra special victory. There are a few sort of objectives or goals that the rulebook gives you that if you can achieve, you can sort of succeed the game in its best possible form.
And that's MonstroCity from Vesuvius Media. Be sure to check out their Kickstarter page. If you have any questions, leave them for us in the comments below. Like us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and everything else that we do, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.